Get on the ground. That's what he screamed at my 8-year-old son, gun drawn, finger trembling on the trigger. And for a second, just one frozen second, the whole world vanished, except for that shaking barrel pointed at my child's chest. Before we get into what happened next, I want you to know this. This story is fictionalized, but it reflects a terrifying reality far too many Black families have lived. You're watching Underrated Black Voices, a channel that brings you gripping stories of injustice, resilience, and power reversals you'll never forget. If you're a parent, a fighter, or just someone who's tired of the silence, this one's for you. Let's begin. It was a Saturday afternoon. Hot asphalt, grocery bags in hand, and my son humming some silly theme song as we walked across the supermarket parking lot. You'd think that would be one of the safest places in America. Middle of the day. Shoppers everywhere. Cameras mounted on every wall. But safety, I've learned, is not a guarantee when you're walking around with dark skin. My son Malik had just darted a few steps ahead to chase a plastic bottle cap rolling in the wind. I called out to him, "Stay close." But before he could turn back, a patrol car screeched to a stop. A white officer flung the door open and jumped out like he was in a war zone. "Get on the ground," he shouted, drawing his gun. At an 8-year-old baby, I dropped the bags. My keys clattered onto the pavement. My breath disappeared. "No, he's my child," I shouted, running to shield Malik with my body. "We were just walking to our car." "What are you doing?" The cop didn't even blink. He had this coldness in his eyes. Not anger, not fear. Something worse. Something deliberate. His gaze swept over me like I was a smudge on his windshield. "People like you don't get to plead," he sneered, stepping so close our foreheads nearly touched. His breath smelled like coffee and contempt. I could hear Malik crying behind me. "Mommy, I didn't do anything. Mommy, I'm scared." And that was it. That was the moment I stopped being afraid. I made a choice. In a single practiced motion, I slid my hand along his forearm, redirected the barrel to the sky, gripped his wrist and twisted hard. His gun dropped. He gasped in pain as I spun him around, kicked out his knee, and slammed him chest first onto the pavement. The crowd screamed. Someone yelled, "Oh my God!" Another pulled out a phone. The officer lay face down, wind knocked out of him. His arm pinned beneath my knee. He looked up at me, really looked at me for the first time. You're trained," he wheezed. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and held it inches from his face. "Tactical Field Trainer. Federal Bureau of Investigation," I said, voice steady, rage buried just beneath the surface. "You just pulled a gun on the son of a federal officer." That was when the second patrol car pulled up. 2 more officers jumped out, hands on holsters ready to escalate, until they saw the badge. Until they saw their fellow officer flat on the ground, disarmed and pinned by a black woman in leggings and a ponytail who just wanted to take her son home. The silence was deafening. And then Malik ran into my arms, shaking. I held him tight. "Too tight," I whispered into his ear. "You are not dangerous. You are not the problem. They are." They tried to scramble and fix it, of course. One officer mumbled something about misunderstanding and suspicious behavior. Another fumbled with his radio. But I wasn't there to comfort them. I was there to protect my son. When Internal Affairs showed up, the stories began unraveling. Apparently, someone had called in a possible car theft in progress. That's what they said. We were walking. We had groceries in our hands. And Malik had smiled at a parked Tesla. That was the suspicious behavior. A black child smiling at a car. I gave my statement. I gave them the footage from the supermarket cameras. I gave them the badge again, just to make sure it burned into their memory. And then I took my son home. That night, as I tucked him into bed, he asked me something I wasn't prepared for. "Mommy, if you weren't there, would he have shot me?" Pause. I couldn't lie to him. "I don't know," I said softly. "But I was there. And he didn't. And I'll always be there." I kissed his forehead and turned out the light. But inside something had shifted. Because if this could happen to my son, with my training, with my badge in my pocket, then what's happening to the sons of mothers who don't have those things? I made a promise to myself that night. I wasn't just going to file complaints. I wasn't just going to let the system investigate itself. I was going to expose the whole damn structure. From the academy that trained that officer to the department that handed him a badge and a gun without teaching him restraint. I was going to remind them what real protection looks like. First, I was going to show up at that police station. Not as a mother. Not even as an FBI agent. But as their new worst nightmare. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes I saw it again. The gun. The look on his face. My son's scream. I'd trained men in combat. I'd instructed teams in split-second response. I'd spent years teaching federal agents how to neutralize threats with minimal force. And yet, not one of those lessons had made it into the mind of the man who aimed a loaded weapon at an 8-year-old child over absolutely nothing. By dawn, I'd packed a bag and put on a suit. Not the FBI-issued windbreaker. Not the sleek black tactical gear. No, this was war in a different form. A war of perception. A war of paperwork, chain of command, and face-to-face accountability. I called my supervisor, Agent Darnell Reeves. He answered on the second ring. I saw the footage, he said before I even spoke. You okay? No, I said flatly. But I will be. I need clearance to walk into APD headquarters and address their training division, today. He was quiet for a moment. This about your son? This is about every black child who walks home with groceries and gets profiled as a threat, I said. And it's about the fact that I had to use force on a man who was supposedly trained by the state. I want to see the damn curriculum. Reeves exhaled. Copy that. You'll have my authorization in 20. Just be careful, Ellis. Atlanta PD is already on edge. They didn't expect to be exposed this publicly. Good, I said. They shouldn't be comfortable. By 10:07 a.m., I walked into the precinct. Every eye in the lobby followed me, some with surprise, others with embarrassment, and a few with quiet contempt. My badge was clipped to my belt. My steps didn't waver. At the front desk, the same officer who had once brushed me off when I'd come in to give a community safety lecture now stood and stiffened like he'd seen a ghost. Agent Ellis, he said. They're expecting you upstairs. I'm sure they are. The elevator was painfully slow. As it rose, I watched my reflection in the steel doors. Boys. But under that surface, a current of fury that hadn't settled since the moment Malik's knees buckled under a stranger's scream. Upstairs, the chief of police sat with 3 other men around a wide conference table. They rose when I entered. It wasn't out of respect. It was reaction. Like they still didn't know exactly who I was. Or maybe they knew, but they didn't understand the weight I carried. Not just in rank, but in purpose. Chief Donnelly was in his late 50s. Military haircut. He gestured to a chair. Agent Ellis, he said, we'd like to thank you for your composure yesterday. I've already placed Officer Creighton on administrative leave pending investigation. I didn't sit. I'm not here for your thanks, I said. I'm here for your training manuals, use of force protocols, psychological screening logs, and field evaluation rubrics. I want to see what qualified him to carry a firearm near children. One of the men, a deputy commissioner I assumed, shifted in his seat. With all due respect, this seems more like an internal matter. I stepped closer. That man pulled a gun on my son. On federal soil. On a federally credentialed operative's child. You think this is an internal matter? Their silence was answer enough. Donnelly cleared his throat. I understand you're upset. Upset. My voice cut across the room like a wire snap. I'm trained to remain composed while clearing rooms full of hostiles, Chief. I don't get upset. Jesus. Identify risk. I eliminate threats. And yesterday the threat wore your badge. The room went dead still. And then I laid the folder on the table. Inside were copies of the footage. screenshots of Creighton's past excessive force complaints, civilian witness statements, and a bullet-point breakdown of how every step he took violated federal protocol. It was airtight, undeniable, and worse for them, public now. "I'm not here as a mother," I said. "I'm here as a federal educator. As someone who's trained the very task forces that protect this city during high-risk operations. And I'm telling you now, if your officers can't tell the difference between a threat and a child with a plastic cap, your entire department is compromised." The youngest officer, Detective Jameson, I learned later, finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you just show your badge right away?" I looked at him for a long moment. He was trying to understand. That was more than most. "Because I shouldn't have to flash federal credentials to keep my child alive," I said. "His humanity isn't tied to my clearance level." His face dropped. He got it. The chief didn't. "Well, Agent Ellis," Donnelly said, his tone clipped, "I understand your position. I'll review the material and pass it to the board." I leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "No," I said. "You'll do more than review. You'll begin mandatory retraining under federal guidance. You'll open your screening evaluations to third-party audits. And every single officer on patrol duty will complete a refresher course on racial bias response, supervised directly by me or someone I assign." Donnelly frowned. "You don't have that authority." "I do now," I said, producing a letter signed by the assistant director of the bureau. "As of this morning, your department is operating under joint compliance review, per Title VI enforcement protocol. Congratulations. You've just become a case study." He slumped back into his chair. And that's when I saw it, fear. Not fear of me physically, but fear of what I represented. Accountability. Oversight. The one thing these precincts feared more than bad PR. Someone with both power and purpose who wouldn't flinch. I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Tell Officer Creighton," I said without turning around. "He's lucky it was me out there. Someone else might have shot him in self-defense. That's what he calls it, right?" I didn't wait for an answer. Back in the car, I finally let my hand shake. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This was just phase 1. What they didn't know. I had recorded everything. Every meeting. Every excuse. Every flicker of evasion in their eyes. Because next week, I was flying to D.C. And when I got there, I'd be sitting before a Senate Oversight Committee. Not just to testify, but to burn down the illusion that these bad apples are rare. Because the truth, the rot is in the root. And I was going to name every branch. I wasn't interested in headlines. I wasn't chasing likes or press conferences or even apologies. What I wanted, what I needed, was for a nation that had learned to flinch at the idea of a black child to finally flinch at the truth about its protectors. And that truth was sitting in 1,000 sealed reports, buried in databases, marked unsubstantiated, no misconduct found, or officer within protocol. I'd seen them before. During audits, during internal reviews, during training recalibrations where the phrase split-second decision got thrown around like a shield. But now I had a different kind of spotlight. Not because I earned it, but because I was forced into it by a man who looked my son in the eye and didn't see a boy. He saw a target. The Bureau wasted no time. By Tuesday morning, I was flown into D.C. with a briefing packet 2 inches thick and a quiet directive from the Deputy Director himself. Don't hold back. Capitol Hill was a machine of polished marble, media buzz, and carefully curated outrage. I testified before. On counter-terror ops, on domestic training programs, on cybersecurity protocols. But this was different. Because this time, the story I carried wasn't about enemy combatants or intelligence failures. It was about America, turning its own children into suspects. And me. I was done speaking softly. I sat alone in a cold waiting room outside the committee chamber. Cameras already waited beyond the door. Reporters whispered behind tinted glass. They didn't care about the years I'd served, about the 19 training sessions I'd led, about the awards, commendations, or field innovations with my name on them. No, they were here because a black woman had flipped an armed officer onto the pavement, and then revealed she trained the very system that empowered him. And that's exactly what I was about to remind everyone of. When they called me in, I stood, straightened my jacket, walked with a calm steadiness that made nervous men underestimate me. The chamber was packed. Senators, aides, stenographers, some eyes sympathetic, some wary, and a few, too many, already rolling in prejudgment. Senator Whitmore, chairing the committee, gave a curt nod. Agent Maya Ellis, we appreciate you making the time. Time, I said, my voice firm but level, is what I almost ran out of when an untrained officer put a gun to my son's chest. Silence fell across the room like a dropped gavel. I didn't wait for permission to continue. My name is Maya Ellis. I'm a tactical field trainer with the FBI. I specialize in high-threat engagement, rapid response, and de-escalation protocols. I've spent the last 14 years ensuring the people entrusted with firearms know the difference between a threat and a bystander. Let it sink in. Last Saturday, after a grocery trip, an Atlanta police officer screamed at my 8-year-old son to get on the ground, weapon drawn. My child hadn't run. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't even moved beyond 10 feet from me. He was smiling at a car. That was his crime. Gasps rippled across the audience. I scanned the faces. Some stiffened. Others lowered their gaze. I stepped between them. The officer didn't ask for ID. Didn't issue a warning. He told me, quote, "People like you don't get to plead." Then he pressed his forehead to mine like I was less than human. The stenographer's fingers fluttered faster. That officer didn't know I was FBI. Didn't know I was trained to disarm him with precision. Didn't know he'd picked the wrong mother to terrorize. Whitmore shifted. Agent Ellis. No, I said sharply. Let me finish. Because this isn't about one man. It's about a culture that trained him, enabled him, and defends him. I've reviewed Atlanta PD's field manuals. I've compared them to bureau standards. The gaps are staggering. De-escalation is optional. Bias testing is superficial. Tactical restraint is a footnote. I opened the binder in front of me. This, I said, holding up a page, is Officer Creighton's certification. He passed his field test in 6 hours. 6 hours. I've trained bomb squad units that take longer to qualify on just radio protocols. A murmur of disbelief. He wasn't just undertrained. He was undersupervised. He had 3 previous excessive force complaints, 2 of them involving black minors, all dismissed internally. He leaned in. And that's why I'm here. Not for vengeance, not for press, but because you're sitting on a powder keg of unchecked authority. And until someone rewires the system, another child's going to be shot, and the headlines will read, "Tragic mistake." But I promise you, it won't be a mistake. It will be the system working exactly as designed. The room was dead quiet now. Senator Whitmore finally cleared his throat. Thank you, Agent Ellis. You've painted a vivid picture. Can you offer recommendations? He nodded. 3. He gestured for me to continue. 1. Mandate federal-level training for all local law enforcement units in high-density urban areas. No exceptions. No budget excuses. If they can carry a weapon, they can afford to be trained properly. He scribbled something down. 2. Create a national misconduct registry for officers. No more hopping precincts after infractions. No more hiding behind ongoing investigations. Full transparency. And then I stood, looked each of them in the eye. 3. Stop treating community outrage like a PR crisis. It's not a storm to weather. It's a signal to reform. And if this government can't understand that, then maybe it's time the communities we swore to protect remind you who you work for. Senator Rodriguez, a Latina woman from New Mexico, spoke next. Agent Ellis, your courage is evident. May I ask, as a mother, how is your son doing? My voice cracked just a little. He's scared, I admitted. But not of monsters. Not of bullies. He's scared of badges. And that's something I can't train out of him. Only this system can. They let me leave after that. No standing ovation. No fanfare. Just cold stares and quiet thoughts. But I didn't care. Because I wasn't there to comfort them. I was there to warn them. Outside, the media swarmed me. Agent Ellis, did you use excessive force? Is your son traumatized? Should civilians be allowed to take down cops? Stop. Looked at the cameras. I didn't take down a cop, I said clearly. I stopped a man with a gun from murdering my son. And then I walked away. That night, as I tucked Malik in again, he asked, "Are the bad guys going to jail?" I brushed his curls back gently. "Maybe not yet," I said. "But they've been seen. And when enough people see clearly, change starts to happen." He nodded sleepy-eyed. "Did you tell them?" "I did," I whispered. And I didn't stutter. Because justice isn't always about a courtroom. Sometimes it's about standing so tall, so loud, so undeniably right, that the whole damn system has no choice but to flinch. I thought the testimony would be the storm. I was wrong. The real storm came after the cameras were turned off. After the senators shook my hand and moved on to the next hearing. After the reporters went chasing another headline and the public's attention fluttered like moths to a brighter fire. But I hadn't gone there for applause. I went there to expose a truth too many people were too comfortable ignoring. And some people, well, they don't take exposure kindly. Started small. A day after the hearing, my work inbox flooded with hate mail. Anonymous complaints. Requests to look into Agent Ellis's background. I was called aggressive, unfit, emotional. The usual dog whistles dressed up in bureaucratic language. Then someone leaked my address. Then someone slashed my tires. But I wasn't afraid. I've been stalked by extremists, targeted by syndicates, and chased through hostile territory by men with more power and less restraint. I didn't flinch when a drunk cartel enforcer aimed a shotgun at my face in Tijuana. I wasn't about to flinch now. But I had something they didn't. Name, badge, voice. So I used it. I called an emergency press briefing at the Atlanta FBI field office. No filters. No scripts. No spin. I stood in front of the podium in full tactical suit and faced the room full of journalists and cameras. I saw them leaning forward, waiting for the apology, the walk back, the softened tone. But what I gave them was fire. You want to intimidate me for defending my child? For demanding training standards that match the power you put in these men's hands? You think you can scare me back into silence? Pause. Try harder. Blick. Flesh. Silence. And then, this is not about me. It's about a system so allergic to accountability that it would rather vilify a mother than question a man who aimed a loaded weapon at a second grader. You can send hate mail. You can slash tires. But you cannot erase the truth. And then I pulled out the documents, the receipts, the stats. Out of the 4,100 misconduct claims filed against Georgia law enforcement in the last 5 years, less than 2% resulted in meaningful disciplinary action. 2. I let that number ring through the air like a bell. A journalist in the front row raised his hand. Agent Ellis, are you accusing the Atlanta Police Department of systemic racism? I looked him dead in the eye. I'm not accusing. I'm confirming. The press conference went viral within hours. Clips flooded Twitter, Instagram, freeware. She didn't flinch. She said what needed to be said. Protect Maya Ellis at all costs. But with the support came the backlash, worse this time. Right-wing pundits called me a rogue agent. Anonymous blue-check accounts claimed I staged the parking lot incident. They edited footage, cropped my statements, posted my son's photo online. That last one broke something in me. Because now they weren't just coming for me. They were trying to weaponize Malik. So I called in a favor. No, scratch that, I called in an army. FBI alumni, military veterans, civil rights lawyers. Black mothers from every state who had buried their sons before they reached 20. We formed a coalition, quietly, effectively, and began launching workshops, legal aid clinics, and internal complaint training sessions under the name Proof. Parents for Reform, Oversight, and Operational Fairness. We didn't just protest. We planned. We trained parents on how to film safely, how to file federal complaints that couldn't be buried. We started a digital map, updated daily, with names and faces of every officer involved in unresolved brutality cases across the state. No doxing, no threats, just truth. And that's what terrified them most. Because truth doesn't blink. By the end of the month, Chief Donnelly was forced to resign. Officer Creighton was officially indicted. Excessive force, abuse of power, reckless endangerment of a minor. The DA had no choice. The evidence was irrefutable. My footage alone had sealed it, but the other mothers, they came out in full force. One after another, stories poured in. His behavior wasn't new. He'd just been protected. I attended the indictment hearing wearing the same suit I wore in front of the Senate. Creighton's lawyer kept trying to make it about my physical aggression. You tackled him. You used advanced combat techniques on a law enforcement officer. The judge interrupted him. Counselor, she neutralized a threat. One who was pointing a firearm at her child. In my courtroom, that's not assault. That's restraint. And I didn't even smile. Because it wasn't over. Not until the culture changed. Not until Malik could walk into a store and be seen as a child. Not a suspect. The day after Creighton was charged, I picked Malik up from school. He didn't say much at first. Just climbed into the car, quiet, thoughtful. Then he asked, "Is the policeman gone?" "For now," I said. He nodded. Then after a beat, "You're not scared?" I met his gaze in the rearview mirror. "I'm always scared," I said. "But I never let fear decide what I do next." He smiled. And then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a drawing. It was a sketch of a woman, me, standing tall between a tiny boy and a shadowy figure holding something that looked like a gun. Above the drawing, in his scratchy handwriting, were 5 words. "My MOM is not afraid." I turned away so he wouldn't see my eyes. Because for all the headlines, the hearings, the lawsuits, and the speeches, that was the moment I knew I'd won something that couldn't be measured. I hadn't just protected my child. I'd taught him he was worth protecting. And that was the beginning of a much bigger fight. Because it wasn't just about my boy. It was about all our children. And I was going to keep showing up for them, until the system had no choice but to change or crumble beneath the weight of 1,000 voices that refused to be silenced. I used to think justice was a straight line. Hard-earned, slow-moving, but ultimately inevitable. But after that parking lot, after that courtroom, after watching Creighton's face as he was escorted out of the hearing in cuffs, I realized something deeper. Justice doesn't move in straight lines. Cracks. Fractures. It erupts from pressure. And sometimes it needs someone to light the match. The days that followed felt like standing at the edge of a fire I'd started on purpose. Not to destroy, but to cleanse. I knew this wasn't just about punishment. It was about precedent. And that precedent had to be loud. So I kept going. I started receiving invitations to speak across the country. Law schools, civil rights panels, police reform conferences. First I hesitated. I didn't want to be turned into a symbol. I wasn't trying to build a brand. But then I remembered the letter from a woman in Ferguson, a nurse. She had written, "When I saw your clip, I didn't cry because of what you said. I cried because you reminded me that we are allowed to fight back." That settled it. If I could remind someone they still had power, then I owed it to the next woman, the next child, to keep talking, keep moving, keep breaking doors down. But not everyone was happy. One night, after a speech at Howard University, I stepped outside the venue into the brisk DC air. My assistant, Janelle, was at my side, still talking about logistics for the next event. Then I noticed it. A white unmarked car parked across the street. Engine running. Windows tinted darker than legal. I stopped walking. I didn't panic. I'd been followed before. But this was different. This wasn't surveillance. This was a message. I walked right up to it. Knocked twice on the glass. Didn't flinch. Nothing. Just the engine humming. Then the window rolled down halfway. I saw a man's silhouette. Couldn't see his face, but I saw the smirk. "Agent Ellis," he said calmly. "The more noise you make, the more you put your little boy at risk." Janelle gasped behind me. My jaw clenched. My hand twitched toward my holster, but I didn't reach. "Not yet." "You following me?" "Yes." "I'm just delivering a reminder. There are consequences." "For who?" "Yes." "For men who point guns at children. Or for women who don't let them get away with it." The car peeled away before I got an answer. By the time I filed the report with the Bureau's Internal Security Division, the plate was gone. Fake registration. No fingerprints on the window. Whoever it was, they were trained. Which meant this wasn't just hate. It was strategy. And I knew where to go next. That weekend I flew to Quantico. Not for comfort. Not for help. For leverage. You see, I didn't just train agents. I trained instructors. People who trained the next generation of intelligence operatives, combat tacticians, cyber sleuths, deep cover assets. Men and women who could sniff out a lie in your tone of voice or dismantle a government in 6 steps. I sat down with Director Hayes, an old colleague. We didn't waste time. "They're coming for you now," she said. "Not just the media. Not just dirty cops. Someone with reach." "I know," I replied. "Which is why I want access to the N14 files." She stared at me. "That's sealed under congressional classification." "I'm not asking for full access," I said. "Just enough to cross-check personnel who've received federal tactical training in Georgia over the last 10 years. I need to see if someone's bleeding bureau methods into the wrong hands." She leaned back in her chair. "You think this is someone we trained?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." He spoke like an operator. No threats, just a warning. Precise, cold. Like a man who's had a badge, lost it, and found a darker flag to follow. She didn't argue. 24 hours later, I had what I needed. I ran the files in a secure clearance room, hour after hour. I wasn't looking for Creighton anymore. I was looking for patterns. Men who'd flunked out of federal programs, dishonorably discharged, or rejected from FBI tactical units, but had quietly resurfaced in private security firms with ties to local law enforcement. And then I found him. Nathan Royce. Former Marine. Trained with one of our tactical units for embedded response simulation. Suspended for aggressive behavior. Removed for psychological instability. 2 months later, he shows up as a consultant at a law enforcement training facility outside Macon, Georgia. Guess who helped build the curriculum? Guess who helped shape the trigger discipline of dozens of officers now patrolling streets with itchy fingers and bad judgment? It wasn't just racism. It was taught racism. Sanctioned aggression. By a man we'd already labeled a risk. And now that man had people watching my house. So I called a press conference. Again. This time I didn't bring binders. I brought receipts. I laid out the files. Timelines. The connections between Royce's failed FBI track and his reappearance in Georgia's police advisory board, appointed quietly by a state rep who'd taken campaign donations from a law enforcement union tied to excessive force defense funds. You could hear the air leave the room. "Your departments aren't broken by accident," I said into the cameras. "They're being broken on purpose by men who know exactly what they're doing, and count on your silence to keep doing it." No one could deny it anymore. The story made national news. Royce disappeared within 48 hours. No trace. But it was too late. I'd pulled the mask off. And in doing so, I sent a message even louder than that parking lot takedown. You can build walls around corruption. You can bury the truth under 1,000 false reports. But if you train someone like me, don't be surprised when I use everything you gave me to expose you. That night, I came home to Malik curled up on the couch, sketching again. He looked up. "Did they listen this time?" Smiled. "Not all of them. But enough." He nodded. Then he showed me his newest drawing. It was me again, but this time standing on a stage. Crowd below me. Their faces were mixed. Black, white, brown. Some angry. Some inspired. But every face had their eyes open. And above me he'd written, "She told the truth. That's all I ever wanted. And it's why I won't stop." I should have known they wouldn't let it end there. The moment I exposed Nathan Royce's influence, his fingerprints smeared across the training of dozens of officers with abuse complaints, the silence from certain State departments became almost too quiet. And I've been in this game long enough to know, when corrupt systems go silent, it means they're regrouping, retaliating. The first sign came a week later. I was mid-lecture at a police accountability seminar in Chicago when I received a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Evers. Sweet woman. Retired schoolteacher. Watches everything from her porch like a hawk with bifocals. She said a man in a maintenance vest had walked around my house 3 times. Didn't knock. Didn't leave a note. Just lingered. By the time the Bureau's field office traced the security footage, it was clear. He wasn't a city contractor. No insignia. No work order. Just a scanner in his pocket and a patch that had been carefully stitched to look real until you examined it closely. Whoever he wasn't casing my house for a break-in. He was checking entry points. I increased security immediately. Reinforced doors. Bulletproof glass. State-of-the-art surveillance. But it wasn't just about me anymore. The moment you put truth into motion, you inherit responsibility. Not just to yourself, but to every voice that hasn't been heard yet. Every mother still waiting for answers. Every child learning to shrink their dreams to fit inside a world that sees their skin before their name. So I pushed forward harder. The Proof Coalition went national in just under 5 weeks. We opened satellite centers in Oakland, Detroit, Charlotte, and Baltimore. Our free legal defense hotline ran 24 hours. We translated our officer complaint toolkit into Spanish, Vietnamese, Creole, and Somali. We created an encrypted app where parents could instantly record and upload police encounters in real time to a secure database managed by independent reviewers. But the most powerful thing we did. We held a summit. Atlanta downtown. Right where it all started. And this time we invited everyone. Victims, families, lawyers, former cops who left the force after being silenced for speaking out, students, grandmothers, journalists, even a few brave city council members who had once ignored police brutality reports but now stood ready to listen, publicly, visibly. When I stepped on stage that morning, I scanned the crowd and realized something I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't alone anymore. The energy was electric, pain, yes, but also resolve. Not a room full of mourning. A room full of movement. I didn't give a speech that day. Told a story. I told them about Malik. About how I used to teach him how to tie his shoes and pack his lunch and look both ways. But now, I also taught him how to put his hands where they could be seen. How to say, "Yes, sir," even when his dignity was bruised. How to survive the first 10 seconds of a misunderstanding that might end his life. And then I told them why I was done teaching him to survive. Because he deserved to live. I ended with a question. How many more of us need to bleed before the country decides our skin isn't a warning sign? The crowd didn't clap right away. They stood. Silent. Ill. Then came the first chant. Not one more. And it echoed. Brew. Filled the air. That night, the mayor called me directly. Said she wanted to meet. Said she was ready to talk real change. Said she'd watched the summit stream and finally understood. I agreed to meet her at City Hall. What I didn't agree to, what I wasn't prepared for, was what happened next. As I pulled into the City Hall garage, a black SUV cut across 2 lanes and screeched to a stop, blocking my path. Before I could shift into reverse, a man in tactical gear jumped out. No badge. No uniform. But I recognized the stance. The weapon slung over his shoulder. He wasn't police. He was trained. I reached for my phone, but another man emerged from the shadows on my left. You made a lot of enemies, Agent Ellis, he said calmly. This is your final warning. Shut it down. Or next time we won't talk first. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I stepped out of the car slowly. Hands visible. Body angled. I looked at them one then the other. You don't scare me, I said. You remind me I'm winning. Then I hit the panic button on my wristwatch. Standard bureau issue. Within 90 seconds, sirens blared. Lights flooded the garage. They vanished before backup arrived, like shadows sliding into the cracks of the city. The mayor was horrified. Apologized profusely. Swore she'd increase my protection detail. But I wasn't there for apologies. I was there to cash in every ounce of momentum we'd built. That night, the city signed a historic agreement. All Atlanta PD officers would be required to complete quarterly de-escalation training led by independent instructors. All body cam footage involving minors would be automatically reviewed by a new civilian transparency board. And every complaint filed would be assigned a public case number for tracking, with status updates mandated every 14 days. But the best part, they named it the Malik Protocol. When I told my son, he didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at me. Then whispered. They listened to me. He nodded. They did. He hugged me. Tighter than usual. And in that moment, I didn't feel like an agent. I didn't feel like a warrior or a whistleblower or a hero. I felt like a mother who had done the one thing every mother dreams of. Built a safer world for her child. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Because justice, once it starts, is never satisfied with just one city. And if they thought Atlanta was loud, they hadn't heard what was coming next. Some battles make headlines. Others leave scars no one sees. Atlanta had changed. But America hadn't. Not yet. After the Malik Protocol passed, we received over 7,000 inquiries in a single week. Emails from families in Cleveland, Oakland, Memphis, and rural Louisiana. Calls from teachers, social workers, even dispatchers, each with a different story but the same plea. Can you help us too? I realized then what I should have known all along. Atlanta wasn't the destination. It was the blueprint. So we scaled. Proof expanded into a national task force. We assembled a team of civil rights lawyers, policy analysts, and field instructors. We deployed regional field liaisons to cities with the highest rates of misconduct to investigation drop-off. We launched an interactive dashboard showing disciplinary records, body cam usage, and complaint response times by district, color-coded, publicly accessible, and damningly clear. In just 3 months, 5 other cities adopted their own versions of the Malik Protocol. Some fought it, of course. Police unions pushed back. Local officials cried budget strain. But we came armed with data, with stories, with truth. Still, I kept my expectations grounded. Until I got the call. It was from Colonel Reuben North, a Pentagon liaison I'd worked with years ago on domestic readiness simulations. Straight shooter. Respected across both federal and military ranks. If he was calling, it wasn't social. Maya, he said, I've got a situation. Classified, for now. I stepped out of the conference hall in St. Louis and moved to the quiet of the hallway. Go ahead. We've picked up chatter, he said. A series of paramilitary-style training camps operating under the guise of private tactical schools. Mostly in the South. But they're not just teaching defense or survival tactics. Go on, I said, already sensing the punchline. They're training local officers and ex-military in offensive civilian suppression tactics. And the name that keeps coming up as a guest instructor. He paused. Nathan Royce. Closed my eyes. I should have known he wasn't gone. Men like him never fade. They regroup, rebrand, and return nastier than before. And now he wasn't just corrupting officers. He was preparing armies. Why call me? He asked. Because your face is on every reform panel in the country, North replied. And because we found this. He sent a file. I opened it on the secure line. It was grainy, captured from a drone feed. A group of men in black tactical gear were standing in a clearing. Target dummies arranged in rows. One by one, they practiced disarming suspects. Except the dummies weren't just silhouettes. They had faces. Photos printed and glued to each one. My face. Malik's. Even my assistant Janelle. You see why this matters now, he said. I nodded slowly. Yeah. This just stopped being local. North gave me full access to the Pentagon's classified oversight report. 57 officers identified as attendees of Royce's training camps. 8 of them were active duty. 3 had already been involved in recent shootings. None charged. This wasn't isolated. It was intentional. And so we activated Phase 2. We used everything we had. Federal partners, legal pressure, the media infrastructure we'd built, to unmask these so-called tactical retreats. We exposed their funding, traced their donor networks, and published a full investigative report in collaboration with The Atlantic. The piece dropped like a bomb. The Royce Doctrine. How extremist training is seeping into America's law enforcement. Congress couldn't ignore it. A federal oversight hearing was scheduled within 2 weeks. This time not just for one precinct, but for the entire country. And they asked me to testify again. But I knew I couldn't go in alone. So I did something different. I brought witnesses. 12 families from 12 states. Each one with a child harmed by an officer who had either directly or indirectly received training from Royce's camps. They walked into that marble chamber like survivors of a war no one believed existed until now. I sat at the end of the table. Wore the same dark blazer I'd worn the day in the parking lot. No jewelry. No makeup. Just resolve. Senators, I began. You once asked me what reform looked like. I told you then it started with acknowledgement. Today, I tell you it demands accountability. I turned to the screen. Behind me, we played a sequence of footage. Side-by-side comparisons of Royce-trained drills and real-life police bodycam clips. The similarities were horrifying. Officer Darrell Sloan, trained at Royce's Spartan Tactical 3 months prior. Bodycam shows him pinning a 14-year-old face down in a puddle. Non-compliant, he said. That boy now suffers from partial paralysis. Slide change. Officer Amanda Kern, class of 2024 at a Royce-funded private retreat. Fired a taser at a pregnant woman who had asked to call her lawyer. Claimed threatening posture. Slide change. 57 known attendees. 8 fatal encounters. 0 convictions. I let that number linger. Now ask yourselves this. What happens when the men sworn to serve are being trained by someone who believes civilians are combatants? Who drills fear into their muscle memory? Who turns traffic stops into tactical takedowns? They couldn't look away now. And then came the twist. Because this time it wasn't just stories. We presented audio recordings, secretly obtained by an undercover trainee embedded in Royce's program. Recordings of him using phrases like preemptive subjugation, black hostility index, and compliance thresholds. Phrases no civilian training program should ever use. The committee room erupted. Senators demanded Royce be brought in. Subpoenas were issued within the hour. The Justice Department announced an investigation the very next day. Royce went on the run. But it didn't matter anymore. We'd named the disease. And now the country had no excuse not to treat it. That night, I returned to my hotel room exhausted. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the city lights outside. My phone buzzed. A video message from Malik. He was standing in front of a classroom whiteboard at school. His teacher had let him do a presentation on his hero. It was me. She's not just my mom, he said into the camera. She teaches the police how not to hurt people like me. She stands up even when they want her to stop. She makes them listen. I covered my mouth, tears burning hot behind my eyes. 'Cause that was it. That was the why. It had never just been about Malik's safety in that parking lot. It was about the next child. The next mother. The next officer who might choose restraint over violence because someone trained them right. And if I had to go to every city, every station, every committee to make that happen, so be it. 'Cause the truth is, when they pointed a gun at my son, they didn't just threaten my family. They activated every ounce of power I'd spent my life building. And Now I was going to use that power to dismantle every root of this rotten system until there was nothing left for fear to hide behind. The Justice Department moved swiftly. Within days of the hearing, Nathan Royce's name hit every major outlet. FBI's Most Wanted, Homeland Security Bulletin, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News tried to spin it, some calling him a disgraced former operative, others painting him as a scapegoat for national unrest. But beneath all the noise, the truth was clear. He was no longer just a corrupt trainer. He was a fugitive, armed, funded, and still recruiting. I knew how this worked. You don't teach domestic suppression tactics without a long game. Royce hadn't trained rogue officers for fame. He'd built a doctrine, a belief system wrapped in combat training, coded language, and patriotic slogans. Something dangerously close to a private militia. Only his army didn't wear uniforms. They wore badges. And the worst part, some of them were still on the inside. 2 weeks after the hearing, Proof received an anonymous tip. Encrypted. Untraceable. But the information was precise. Royce was hiding in northern Texas, in a ranch outside Wichita Falls, allegedly protected by a retired sheriff and 2 former Marines with dishonorable discharges. It was remote, fenced in, guarded by drones, underground bunkers. Intel suggested he'd been moving between compounds using supply routes used for gun show circuits, unregistered weapons, body armor, and tactical gear included. I didn't hesitate. I flew to Quantico the next morning and walked straight into Director Hayes's office. She looked up from her desk with that familiar expression. Half admiration, half frustration. I know that look, she said. It's your, I need to do something reckless face. I dropped the file on her desk. We need to bring him in. But we need to do it quietly. No SWAT team. No flashy raid. She raised an eyebrow. You want to go in yourself? Not just me, I said. I want my unit. Her eyes narrowed. You mean? Yes, the whole team. Tactical 6. Tactical 6 wasn't just any unit. We were a hand-picked federal response team designed for deep cover extraction, high-threat infiltration, and precision disarmament. We hadn't operated as a full unit in years. But we were still active. Still lethal. And every single one of them owed me a favor. Hayes exhaled. This isn't sanctioned. I know. If it fails, it won't. And that's how it began. In 48 hours we reassembled. Danica, cyber intel and drone specialist. Torres, former Navy SEAL, hand-to-hand combat. Malik Jackson, not my son but my second-in-command back in the early days. Sharpshooter. Steady nerves. Aaron Will, and Isaiah Ghost Freeman, surveillance ghost silent entry expert, and the reason I survived that op in Caracas 5 years ago. We didn't need to speak much, just exchanged nods, loaded gear, checked frequencies, and then we moved. We landed outside Wichita Falls under the cover of darkness, borrowed bureau transport, no lights, no signals, just boots, breath, and night vision. The compound was exactly what we expected, and worse. Trip wires disguised as brush. Heat sensors embedded in trees. 2 men on watch, rotating in 15-minute intervals. Royce had been preparing for this for a long time. He wasn't just hiding. He was daring someone to come get him. But we weren't just someone. We were Tactical 6. I gave the silent hand signal. Torres slipped behind the west barn and disabled the main motion sensor. Ghost climbed the eastern tower and cut the comms. Danica took out the signal disruptor guarding the satellite uplink. Within 20 minutes, Royce's fortress was deaf and blind. I approached the main cabin. Front entrance locked. Reinforced steel. But that's why I didn't use it. I climbed onto the roof, quiet, fast, and dropped through a ventilation shaft, landing in a crouch on the second-floor balcony overlooking the central war room. And there he was, Nathan Royce. Gray beard, black fatigues, eyes as cold as I remembered. He was watching surveillance footage. Of me. Of the Senate hearing. The press conferences. My face paused on his screen like a bullseye. I dropped down. He turned. Mile. I knew you'd come, he said. You're under federal indictment, I replied. Surrender now. He stepped closer. Funny. You still think this is about law and order? He motioned to the walls, lined with maps, tactical drills, names. Some crossed out. Others circled. This isn't about me anymore, he said. It's a movement. One you can't stop. You built a cult of cowards, I said. Men who hide behind badges and flinch at the idea of equality. He laughed. You think you're the answer, he said. You think mothers like you scare us? I stepped forward. Not yet. But we're not done. Then I hit the signal. In a single synchronized movement, Torres blew the back door. Ghost secured the armory. Danica shut down the power grid and locked the external gates. Jackson emerged with cuffs, weapon drawn. Royce reached for his pistol, but I was faster. I disarmed him, kicked his weapon across the room, and slammed him into the table. He grunted, dazed. You're going to arrest me. No, I said. I'm going to show you what restraint looks like. Then I cuffed him. The ride back was silent. Royce didn't say a word. Neither did we. When we handed him over to federal custody, the agents looked at us like we were ghosts. You did this without authorization, one asked. No, I said. We did it with purpose. Royce was indicted on federal conspiracy charges, illegal paramilitary activity, and domestic terrorism enhancement. He'll never see open air again. But more importantly, his doctrine crumbled. His supporters scattered. His network exposed, dismantled, and archived for public record. A week later, I stood in front of a crowd in Washington, D.C. This time, not in a Senate chamber, but at the first-ever National Summit on Police Reformation and Civilian Protection. Malik was beside me, holding my hand. He looked up and whispered, "Is it over?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "But now they know we're not afraid to finish what we started." The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in chanting. Say her name, Maya Ellis. Say his name, Malik Ellis. Say their names. We protect us. I didn't cry. I stood taller. Because for the first time in this long, bloody, exhausting fight, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight alone. We had changed something. Not just laws. Not just policies. Culture. And that was the real victory. It didn't end with handcuffs. And it didn't end with the crowd chanting our names. Movements don't work like that. Justice isn't a door you walk through. It's a path you build. Every inch, every stone, every scar pressed into the dirt by people who refuse to stop walking. In the weeks after Nathan Royce's arrest, something shifted across the country. You could feel it. Police departments once dismissive now sent quiet emails, requesting copies of the Malik Protocol. Mayors who once avoided my calls now invited proof representatives to advisory meetings. Recruiters started reaching out to me, not to silence me but to ask, "Can you help us do better?" And yet, for every city that took a step forward, another took 2 steps back. In one town, an officer kneeled on the back of a teenager for moving suspiciously. In another, a judge tossed out a misconduct suit after ruling the dashcam footage inconclusive, despite it showing a baton striking a handcuffed boy in the ribs. The headlines didn't shock me anymore. They enraged me. But they didn't shake me. Because I knew now, I was in this for life. But I wasn't alone. That truth hit me full force the day I walked into a proof youth workshop in Baltimore. It was in a community center barely held together by duct tape and dreams. But inside it, magic. 30 young black kids, boys and girls, some no older than Malik, sat with notebooks in their laps, eyes locked on the instructor. Her name was Tasha, a former foster kid who had once been arrested at 14 for loitering. Now she was teaching self-advocacy, legal literacy, and de-escalation strategy to children who were already being treated like threats. I watched in silence from the back, unseen. Then a boy, no older than 10, raised his hand. "What do we do?" he asked. If the cop is scared of us before we even say anything. Usha paused. And then she said, then you do what we're doing now. You speak up. You speak out. You learn. You fight. And you remind them you belong here. I stepped forward. Tasha blinked in surprise. Then her face lit up. Y'all, she said. This is Agent Maya Ellis. The one from Atlanta. The one who made the cops listen. The room exploded into whispers, gasps, quiet claps. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I just sat with them. Heard their stories. Their fears. Their dreams. One girl said she wanted to be a lawyer but didn't think she was allowed. Another said she wanted to make rules. Big rules, she clarified. Ones that protect us first. I told her that's what lawmakers do. She grinned. Then I'm gonna be a lawmaker. That moment stuck with me. That night, after the workshop, I found myself walking the quiet streets of Baltimore's West Side. Brick buildings. Murals of faces long lost. Bouquets tied to stop signs. Names painted in red and gold and silver. And one phrase over and over. We keep us safe. The words hit me differently now. I used to believe safety came from systems. That if you trained enough officers, passed enough policies, shouted loud enough into the right rooms, eventually justice would follow. But that was only part of it. The truth was deeper. Safety is built by people who care more about each other than they do about titles or uniforms. People who look at their neighbors and say, I got you. And I'll fight for you, even when the world won't. That's what we had built. Not a solution. Not a fix. But a foundation. One that kids could stand on higher than we ever could. The next day, I received a call that sealed the arc. It was from the president's office. They were forming a new national task force on law enforcement accountability and civilian safety. And they wanted me to chair it. I sat in silence for a moment, phone pressed to my ear. Chairing a federal task force meant more than meetings and policy drafts. Meant access, oversight, power to issue subpoenas. To make noise that couldn't be silenced with internal memos or PR teams. But most importantly, it meant platform. A chance to build something permanent. Accepted. 2 months later, I stood at the White House briefing room. Cameras flashing. Reporters waiting. My face broadcast across the world. Good morning, I began. My name is Maya Ellis. I'm a mother. I'm a federal agent. I'm a survivor of state-sanctioned trauma. And starting today, I'm leading a team committed to ensuring that no child in this country is treated like a suspect before they're even old enough to vote. I outlined our agenda. Mandatory de-escalation certification. Transparency in misconduct investigations. Federal incentives for departments that show civilian trust increases. And real consequences, federal ones, for departments that fail to meet national standards. It was the most ambitious reform plan since the 1960s. Some called it radical. Others called it overdue. But I didn't care what they called it. I called it necessary. That evening, I returned home to Atlanta. Malik greeted me at the door with a hug and a note. It read, I'm proud of you, Mommy. You didn't just protect me. You protected the whole world. I held him tight. And for the first time in a long time, felt peace. Not because the work was done. Never would be. But because I had kept my promise. When that cop pointed a gun at my son, I made a vow. To never let another badge use fear as a weapon. To fight with precision, not just power. To build a legacy, not just a moment. And now, that legacy had a name. Face. Protocol. Movement. And it was only just beginning.